In this video, we'll continue looking at the other mapping styles on the UVW map modifier. Okay, let's take a look at how you'd handle something cylindrically shaped. With the cube selected, we'll hit Delete, then right-click choosing Unhide by Name. When the dialog opens, we'll select the cylinder from the list. Now, before we go any further, you might be curious as to why we haven't had to worry about all this mapping stuff until now. I mean, we've made plenty of objects and we've certainly applied more than a few materials. Everything's been rendering fine each time out. That's because each and every primitive object in 3ds Max comes with a special setting called Generate Mapping Coordinates. The option's designed to offer a generic style of mapping for that particular shape of object. Max slaps on what it hopes is an adequate style of wrapping and mapping, but something that has absolutely no control. If it doesn't do the job, you're pretty much stuck with the way things are. So the real solution is always to get in the habit of applying your own mapping. You've then got control over moving your designs and patterns however they need to be adjusted. So don't rely upon what Max gives you. Add your own UVW map modifier if you're serious about doing things right. See, here's the option on the cylinder. With the object selected, in the Modify column, you'll find the command down at the bottom of the settings. The box we just worked on had it too, we just didn't take note of it. In fact, let's see just how well that freebie mapping control in the cylinder handles the skin we apply. Let's open up the material editor and we'll drag the top right-hand side skin over to the cylinder. Take a look at the top of the object. Not something that I'm frankly very happy about. And without a mapping control in the stack, I've got nothing that I can adjust to fix the problem. Let's instead do it right by adding the UVW map modifier. Now the mapping always starts with the default setting of planar. Let's change that to cylindrical. The cylindrical style of mapping wraps a material around the surface, butting up the ends of the map in the back, which usually forms a seam. The style is best used for cylindrically shaped surfaces. Vases, soda cans, tree branches, telephone poles, maybe a character's leg, anything that's basically cylindrical. To solve the problem that we're still seeing on the top of the object, which by the way is also happening on the bottom, the mapping style has a special option called Cap, which maps both the top and bottom of the surface using planar coordinates. Let's go ahead and turn that on. As we orbit around the back, we'll see the problem that typically arises with cylindrical mapping: a seam. Many times, you just can't rid yourself of that unsightly seam. So if you can't rotate the object, you simply rotate the mapping, in other words, the gizmo. Back in the modifier stack, we'll open up the UV map entry getting down to the gizmo level. We can then rotate things around. Now as we do, specifically take note of the green line on the gizmo. This represents where the two sides of the map meet, in other words, the seam. We'll rotate things around, and problem solved. I also turned off my edged faces so I could get a better look at the mapping. That was done by tapping F4 on the keyboard. Okay, let's take a look at dealing with round objects. We'll first delete the cylinder, then right-click on the screen choosing Unhide by Name. From the list, we'll double-click on Sphere. Selecting the object and heading over to the Modify column, we'll again see the Generate Mapping Coordinates option down at the bottom of the controls. Not wanting to rely on that, we'll go ahead and add our UVW map modifier. With the gizmo in place, we'll change the option from planar over to spherical. Spherical mapping works by wrapping a map around the object, then pinching the map together at both the top and bottom of the object's surface. It's best used on anything round, from planets to sports balls to certain shapes of fruit, like maybe a watermelon, apple, or orange. You could even use it to map a character's head. Again, anything round in nature. Let's reopen the material editor and we'll apply the skin on the lower left-hand side sample slot. If we now orbit around in the scene, we'll visually see the pinching that's happening at both ends of our sphere. Another option we could use for round objects is the shrink wrap style of mapping, which drapes the map over the top of the object, having it pinch only at the bottom. In the Modify column, we'll change the style of mapping from spherical to shrink wrap. Again, orbiting around in the scene, we'll see the mapping now draping over the top of the object while still pinching at the bottom. So which of the two styles is most appropriate to use on a round object? Well, that really needs to be decided on a case-by-case basis. The bottom line is you always want to use the one that looks best. Now, one more thing I'd like to talk about, and that's the face method of mapping, which is designed to position a material's map on each and every face of an object. The pattern will get smaller and smaller on the object with each additional face that's included in the surface's geometry. You can see that by simply changing the number of segments on our sphere. I'll also reactivate edged faces so you can get a better idea of the actual number of segments on our object. So with a fewer number of faces, the design gets larger on top of the surface. Okay, that'll give you what you need to know about mapping with the UVW Map modifier. Anytime that you've applied a material to an object that incorporates some kind of pattern or design, the UVW Map modifier ought to be your first line of defense in controlling how that material will be positioned on your object surface. So remember both your options and each mapping style's limitations. You do that, and you'll be well on your way to precisely controlling the skins that you've created.